y'all, it's Kate from the Little Apothecary and welcome back to my channel.
Hey y'all, I'm back with episode 4 of my top favorite 100 books read on Goodreads out of the 1,000+ books I've read. I think I'm up to like 1,014 now, somewhere around there, and I think I've decided that at the end of all of this, I'll do one last video in this series of honorable mentions that didn't quite make the cut for one reason or another, and I'll talk about those when I get to that video. But for now, we have another 10 books up. This is episode 4, so this is essentially, 40 to 50 maybe. I think we're going to be halfway there at the end of this video. So let's just jump right in. Our first book up is I Captured the Castle by Dottie Smith. This is a classic, in a sense, YA coming-of-age historical fiction. It was released in 1948, and our spoiler-free summary says that for 6 months in 1934, 17-year-old Cassandra Mortman keeps a journal. Her family is eccentric and completely broke. They live in the ruined Suffolk castle. So why is this one on my list? For me, this reminded me if Jane Austen wrote a YA novel. It's very Jane Austen-esque, but with the YA element in it. I loved the vibes that we got through it. It had such good vibes throughout. And we have so many characters that there is something for everyone in this book. It's a great pick-me-up novel, and I loved how we were balancing different perspectives and characters throughout this book. And some quotes that I got from I Captured the Castle: why is summer mist romantic and autumn mist just sad? And noble deeds and hot baths are the best cure for depression. And I love that. Next up is a book that was one of the very first books that I reviewed on this channel. Way back when this channel was called Love Story, and I was back at the other apartment in my old job and just getting my feet wet in these book reviews. That is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. This is a historical fiction book, but historical fiction in a completely unique way. This was released in 2016, but it takes place in 1922 in Russia. And so our spoiler-free summary: Count Alexander Rostov is sentenced by a Bolshevik tribunal to house arrest in the historic Metropole, which is a grand hotel across the street from the Kremlin. Living in an attic room, he is forced to watch some of the most tumultuous decades in Russian history unfold in the streets just outside his window, and he could do nothing about it. Why this one is on my list? Like I said, this is one of my first books to review, so it has a little bit of a soft spot in my heart. And this book is actually how I discovered BookTube. I read this book and I went to go look something up about it. I don't even remember what it was, but I did a Google search of it, and there was some video reviews that came up on BookTube for this book, and that's how I discovered BookTube. And I just love it just has a special place in my heart. Like I said, it's just such a unique idea. You've often hear of house arrest, but what about house arrest in a historic hotel across the street from the Kremlin? Just that whole idea is just so unique to me. I became deeply invested in the Count and everything the Count did in his relationships and his activities and just this whole story of the Count. And it felt just so familiar to me. I've never heard of this history before. I didn't know anything about this hotel or really Russia at this time, but it just felt so familiar to me, like I knew about this the whole time. And also, as I was getting ready to write the first review, I learned that I think it was Ewan McGregor was starting up a short mini TV series for this book. I can't wait to see that adaptation. I think it's finally out now. It took a while to get there because of COVID and whatnot, and it's finally out. I have it bookmarked on my computer to watch, and I can't wait to watch it because I feel like he will do such a fantastic job as embodying the Count that I can't wait to see him as Count Rostov. So some quotes from A Gentleman in Moscow. Poetic concision demands the avoidance of a pair of words when a single word will suffice. But then children understand the purpose of secret rooms better than they understand the purpose of Congresses, courtrooms, and banks. And Hollywood is the single most dangerous face in the history of a class struggle. Oh, next up is a definite classic. That is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. One of my favorite Jane Austen novels. This is one of those books where I just chose one at random because I love all of her works equally. This is, of course, a classic literature romance released in 1813. And it is, you know, one of those romances of the ages. It kind of sparked this whole enemies to lovers idea. And it's got on the other hand, you know, it's such a witty comedy in its own way. Jane Austen is known for her romance, but her wit in her books is just unbarred. It is unparalleled to almost any other author of her time that I've read. So I feel like I don't really need to say what Pride and Prejudice is about. Everyone knows it in a sense or another. They've either read the book, seen the movie, read adaptations of it. Everyone knows kind of Pride and Prejudice. But why is this one on my list? Jane Austen's brilliant use of her wit and sarcasm, and especially for women at that time in 1813, is just by far the best, as I've said. I've read this book several times, and I come to appreciate new things on each reread. I just love it. Like this last reread, there was a character that I didn't quite notice before that on my reread I really noticed, and I love being able to have that experience on rereads. Some quotes, of course, from Pride and Prejudice. First, we have the most famous quote from Pride and Prejudice, the very first sentence in the book. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. And we have, there is no enjoyment like reading. When I have a house of my own, I shall be miserable if I have not an excellent library. And, you know, Jane Austen is a big supporter of reading, obviously an author of her own books, and just love that quote because it just reaches my reader soul. The next book up is a book that found me at just the perfect time. That is A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. This is a translated fiction, contemporary fiction, released in 2012, though it found me much later than that. Often, I feel like an underappreciated Frederick Bachman book. It's one of those books that has to find the right readers at the right time. It's not going to be for everyone, but it found me at the right time. Also an adaptation now of a movie. I believe it's titled A Man Called Ove, which I'm not sure why they changed the name, but it stars Tom Hanks. I have not seen it yet, but I really want to because I love Tom Hanks and I love this book. Spoiler-free summary of A Man Called Ove. A grump yet lovable man finds his solitary world turned on its head when a boisterous young family moves next door. Ove is misunderstood. People see his tough exterior, but fail to see the man behind the mask. And why did this book make it on this list? Why did it find me at just that right time? Why did it move me? Because, as I said, this book found me at exactly the right time. It's cute and quirky and beautiful writing. It's heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. It reached all of the emotions that I needed it to reach just at that time. Some quotes. He was a man of black and white, and she was color. All the color he had. And that is exactly how I feel about John. He is the color in my black and white life. Another quote, and when she giggled, she sounded the way Ove imagined champagne bubbles would have sounded if they were capable of laughter. And this quote, I never imagined what champagne bubbles would sound like before, but after I read this, I knew exactly how champagne bubbles sounded if they giggled. Our next book up is a book in a series. I just had to pick one in this series, but this is one of my favorite series of all times, especially one of my favorite fantasy series. That's the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. I picked Jade War, which is book 2 in the series. It's an urban fantasy series released in 2019. An epic trilogy. Jade Bone Saga is an epic trilogy about family honor and those who live and die by the ancient laws of blood and jade. It's about crime families, but more than just a fantasy mafia series. A lot of people described it as mafia, but with Asians and fantasy, but it feels like so much more than that. Yes, it has that in there, but it's so much more, and you just have to read this series to be able to appreciate how much more it is. I can't really go into a lot of spoiler-free content about this because it is the second book in the series, so a lot of what I would say about it would give away stuff from book 1, so I'm just going to jump right into why this one has made my list. Fonda Lee's character work is by far some of the best I've ever read, and her action scenes were incredible. They were so well written. I could see everything happening in these action scenes without having to know really how the jade works. We just know that jade gives them magic that gives them all these powers. The action scenes were just there in my head. I didn't have to think about them. They were just there. And for me, that is a unique experience. I often have hard times with action scenes because I don't watch a lot of action movies or TV, and so I don't have that basis in my head, but they just existed in my head. I didn't have to think about them at all. And her developing plot line throughout the whole series, really, but especially in book 2, is so well done. Her world building throughout this series, it just builds on itself, and it's just so good. And honestly, this is one of those perfect second books. A lot of series have second book syndrome, sophomore syndrome, but this book was a perfect second book. It built on book 1 and what happened in the first book, and it gave us a story in book 2, but then it also gave us something to look forward to in book 3, which was an incredible ending to this trilogy. I have just one quote from this book because it's just one of those books that I was just enthralled with throughout. Flowers grow even in the desert, so too there is nowhere love cannot happen. Moving on, we have The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This is a fantasy magical realism LGBT rep book. It's an atmospheric book, and I loved everything about it. I read this book, and after I finished this book, I just sat there staring at the wall. It was so good. I was crying. I was laughing. It was so good. This was released in 2019. It's a timeless love story set in a secret underground world, a place of pirates and painters, lovers, liars, and ships that sail upon a starless sea. Zachary Ezra Rawlings discovers a book full of fairy tales that has his own story from his childhood in it. He uncovers clues, a bees, a key, and a sword that leads him to a masquerade party in New York, to a secret club, and through a doorway to an ancient library hidden far below the surface of the earth. Y'all know how I love secret magical libraries, so this one had to be on that list. And there the story really begins once he gets to that underground library. It is a love story to books and libraries and stories and the power that they hold, and I love it so much. Why is this one on my list? Because of its atmospheric writing was just so breathtaking. I kept reading this book and I thought, oh my gosh, that's a beautiful sentence. That's a beautiful phrase. That's a beautiful paragraph. This whole page is just beautiful. I wanted to highlight the whole book. I wrote down so many quotes from this book. It was at least a third of the book, probably more like half of the book I have quoted down in my quote book. I got swept away in the story itself, which doesn't often happen with me, but the way that this was told, it was just so magical and breathtaking, and I just got swept away in it, and I lost track of time. I would read 5 or 6 chapters at once and not realize how late it was. It's got relatable characters, especially our main character, Zachary. He was so relatable to me. I just felt like, yes, I see you, I feel you, you and I are the same. And it just made me want to escape. Some quotes from this, like I said, I wrote down a lot of quotes. So I have a lot of quotes here, but they're all just so, I couldn't just pick just one quote. The writing was just so good. So bear with me, there's like four or five quotes here. Zachary wonders how you can miss someone's smile when you've only seen it once before. It tastes older than stories. It tastes like myth. We were all stardust and stories. And it feels like a hug if a hug were a place. And that is a phrase that I think about so much since I read this book. Like, at first I was like, how is that? Does that happen? But it just makes complete sense in my head. Like, of course, if a hug was a place, this would be the hug. This would be the place. And it just makes complete sense in this book. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh wow, we got 4 books left, so we're about halfway through this list of 10. Next up is another book in one of my favorite series, fantasy series, that is the Books of Babel series by Josiah Bancroft. I went ahead and picked book 1 in this series, Senlin Ascends, but honestly, I loved each one of the books on their own equally the same for different reasons. So you can just substitute any one of the 4 books in the Books of Babel series here and it will be the same. This is a fantasy steampunk adventure series. This book was released in 2013, the start of the Books of Babel series. And our spoiler-free summary: soon after arriving for his honeymoon at the Tower of Babel, the mild-mannered headmaster of a small village school, Thomas Senlin, gets separated from his wife, Mara. And in order to find her, he must navigate madhouses, ballrooms, and burlesque theaters. He has to survive betrayal, assassins, and the long guns of a flying fortress. Why is this one of my favorites and why is this one on my list? So we've got realistic but zany characters here that I just couldn't help but love. Fantastic world building. I love how as we progress in the tower, each level is its own world, and that just amazes me how many different worlds Josiah Bancroft can put into this one series. And Thomas Senlin is like the everyman in just this crazy world, someone that you can relate to in this world of crazy, unique characters. And Josiah Bancroft uses such unique prose, and his vocabulary is out of this world. I learned so many new words reading this series that I just can't help but love it. Some quotes from Senlin Ascends. Charm is perhaps the most elusive of virtues. Often, the simplest way to unlock a door is to knock upon it. And that is one of those quotes that you're like, oh, yeah, duh. It just makes me laugh because it's so simple. And then the last quote from Senlin Ascends: the truth, when finally told, will often sound strange, while a lie is so often familiar. And that is so true in this world. Oh, our next book up is Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. This is a YA mystery thriller released in 2021, and I love this book for so many different reasons, which I'll get to in just a minute. But this book was written by an Indigenous author, takes place in an indigenous a town that borders an indigenous settlement, and I loved it. Spoiler-free summary of Firekeeper's daughter. As a biracial, unenrolled tribal member and the product of a scandal, Donna's Fontaine has never quite fit in, both in her hometown and on the reservation. That was the word I was looking for earlier. Sorry for saying settlement reservation. She moves home to take care of her fragile mother and witnesses a shocking murder that thrusts her into a criminal investigation when she agrees to go undercover. So why is this book on my list? Why do I love this book so much? It's so well written. I just read this book and thought, wow, this is so well written. It seamlessly interwoven indigenous culture and language into the prose itself, so it felt normal and not like it was trying to push it on its readers. I loved Granny June. She's my favorite character in this book, and she's one of my favorite grandma characters I've read in all of books. She's just so fantastic. And I felt like it had a great conclusion that felt natural. It did not feel forced at all. Felt like if it went in a direction where a lot of these YA books would generally go with this plot, it would feel forced and not natural. But this ending, the way that it ended, just felt so natural, and like this is what would happen in real life, and I just appreciated the naturalness of that ending. Some quotes from Firekeeper's daughter. When someone dies, everything about them becomes past tense, except for the grief. Grief stays in the present. Kindness is something that seems small, Donis, but it's like tossing a pebble into a pond and the ripples reach further than you thought. Our next book up, and I think this is two more books. The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. I'm convinced I'm saying that name correctly, but I'm probably saying it wrong. I've probably been saying it wrong this entire time I've been saying it, but either way, her book has landed on my favorite 100 books list. I love this book, and I really need to read the rest of this series, at least book 2. I don't remember where we're at in that series. I've only read book 1. It's a fantasy, YA, Indian inspired. I love it so much. It was released in 2017, like I said. I really need to get caught up on this trilogy. This is book 1 in the Daevabad trilogy. Our spoiler-free summary: Nahiri is a talented con woman, but has never believed in magic. When she accidentally summons a dark, mysterious jinn warrior, she must accept that the magical world exists. She goes on a journey with this jinn to Daevabad, the legendary city of brass, and through their adventures happen afoot. It is crazy, it is magical. I love the prose. Why is this book on my list, even though I've only read book 1 in this trilogy so far? I loved the characters, especially the relationship of the jinn and Nahiri. To me, that was like a chef's kiss. And this relationship is a gradual relationship. At first, she's very hesitant for it. She tries to resist it. But the relationship that develops throughout this book between those two is just so endearing. I love it so much. It made me laugh so many times. And the world building in this book is unlike other world building I've seen. It's so extensive and vibrant and lifelike, and I just love it so much. Realistic. One quote from this book: that greatness takes time, Banu Nahida. Often the mightiest things have the humblest beginnings, and that is so true. The last book up on this list of 10 favorites is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. Yet another book that I've only read book 1 in the trilogy, but I really need to read the rest because this one was just life-changing for me. This is a fantasy science fiction dystopia released in 2015. Like I said, this is book 1 in the Broken Earth trilogy. Really need to read the rest of those books. 3 terrible things happen in a single day. Aesun's husband has brutally murdered her son and kidnapped their daughter. An empire collapses as most citizens are murdered, and a great red rift has been torn into the heart of the earth. Aesun is on the hunt for her husband and daughter, and through there, crazy things happen. Why is this one on my list? The world building in this is science fiction. World building is unlike anything I've ever read before. It is Earth, but Earth in a science fiction setting, and it does not feel like Earth. But it also, at the same time, it does feel it. It's hard to explain because it doesn't feel like Earth, but it also does feel like Earth in very different senses. This book was mind-blowing to me. I read this and I had no idea what to do afterwards. I just sat there and was awed by it. It pulled me in instantly from page one. I was in and ready for it, which doesn't happen often. I'm often a person that has to be slowly reeled in. So when a book catches me instantly from page one, I know it's going to be an amazing read. Our character work in this book is so incredible, and we have this emotion in this book, this raw emotion that we get, especially with Aesun's character. I have never felt emotion like I have with Aesun. Part of that is because of the second person point of view, but usually second person point of views don't really work for me. It's hard for me to get caught in that second person, but the way that N.K. Jemisin uses the second person is so different and unique. She doesn't use it all the time. She uses it sparingly, and because of that, it really works because it's unique, and when it's used, you know you have to pay attention to what's being said. And lastly, my last reason is because I just loved this blending of fantasy and science fiction. It is the perfect blend of the two genres. It's incredible. Anytime anyone asks me for a fantasy sci-fi recommendation, specifically blending those two worlds together, I always recommend the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, and I need to get to the rest of that series. Y'all, I need like an extra day or two in my week or even month to just get caught up on reading that I want to do, because there's so much I want to read. And that's why my TBRs are always so long. So I've got 2 quotes from the 5th season. No one expects mountains to be gentle, but they are inexorable. And when the hand pulls, alabaster goes. And words make things real in a way that even memories can't. So you stop. And that is so true, especially when you're grieving. When you put it into words, when you say it out loud, it becomes something real and different, and it's so hard to come across. So that is this group of my favorite 10 out of my favorite 100 out of my 1,000 plus books I've read on Goodreads. Let me know in the comments below, which of these books have you read before? Which ones are you looking forward to adding to your TBR? As always, keep reading, and I love y'all to the moon and back.